29 years ago. He vanished on his way home after his final shift. No one knew what happened, until now. Dominic Johnson was the only black officer who dared to speak out against his own colleagues, and then he disappeared. No body, no evidence. The case was closed after just 3 months. No one asked why. No one was held accountable. In the summer of 1994, Sergeant Dominic Johnson, 42, finished his last shift at the Oakland Police Department and walked out at 1:45 a.m. He never made it home for nearly 3 decades. His case remained classified as a disappearance without a trace. His family, fellow officers, and the local black community never stopped searching, but no answers ever came. Then in 2023, a 19-year-old volunteer named Imani Carter, helping clear out an old warehouse in West Oakland, accidentally opened a room that had been locked since the 1990s, and what she found inside reopened the entire investigation. Oakland in the late 80s and early 90s was a place easy to love and just as easy to lose hope in. Rows of red brick buildings sat beside crumbling housing projects. Ambulance sirens echoed almost nightly. Amid that backdrop, Dominic Johnson stood out as a rare figure, a black police officer on bicycle patrol, seen tying a kid's shoelace outside the corner store, or stepping between a couple mid-argument not to arrest, but to de-escalate. He didn't fit the image of a TV cop. He was a broad-shouldered man with a serious but never menacing gaze, and a low, steady voice that always seemed to carry a story. Dominic came from a working-class family. His mother worked night shifts as a nurse. His father was a railroad laborer. His grandfather had disappeared during a 1968 protest for black labor rights. That story was never fully explained, but it haunted Dominic from childhood. He once told a close friend, "I can't let people just vanish like my grandfather did." That belief is what led him, after high school, to turn down an athletic scholarship and instead enroll at the Oakland Police Academy, where, at the time, only 6% of cadets were black. Surviving in that environment wasn't easy. Dominic was sharp, resilient, but it was his honesty that isolated him. He opposed random stop-and-search operations in majority black neighborhoods. He filed an internal report when he saw a fellow officer erase body cam footage after a violent arrest. Another time, he refused to join a citywide sweep he believed was targeting vulnerable communities. His actions got him bounced from unit to unit night patrol, crime scene control, then records. But Dominic didn't quit. He believed change only happens when someone stays at home. Dominic was a quiet man. His wife, Rochelle, taught African-American literature at the local high school. They met at a community forum where Rochelle was protesting the consolidation of public schools. They had 2 daughters, the eldest, Zora named after writer Zora Neale Hurston, and Ava, after filmmaker Ava DuVernay. No matter how long his shifts ran, Dominic never missed school performances or parent-teacher meetings on Saturday mornings. If he wasn't on duty, Dominic would wake up early, throw on gray shorts and a t-shirt, and bike down to the bakery at 23rd and Foothill. He'd buy cream-filled pastries for his girls, coffee for Rochelle, and a big bag of cookies to bring to Ramondi Park where local kids played basketball without much adult supervision. That was how Dominic built trust not with a badge, but by simply showing up again and again. Locals knew him not just as a cop, but as the one who's there when you need him. When an elderly woman's car broke down in an intersection, Dominic pushed it home himself. When a young man was denied access to his records because he had no permanent address, Dominic wrote a personal letter that helped him enroll in GED classes. He didn't see it as going above and beyond, just doing what was right. But inside the department, Dominic became inconvenient. Many officers, especially from the tactical units, began labeling him as not one of us. Rumors swirled that he was recording conversations, that he was sending anonymous reports to outside agencies. No proof ever surfaced, but the isolation grew. Some even warned Rochelle that her husband should pick a side, while others were promoted to elite investigative teams. Dominic was quietly moved to the records division, a polite way of pushing him off the streets, but what few realized was that this gave him access to old files, allowing him to piece together a pattern of disappearances no one wanted to talk about. Most of the missing were young black men who vanished within 48 hours, no cameras, no witnesses, often dismissed as runaways. Dominic began mapping the cases, tracking timestamps, finding overlaps. Part of him hoped he was wrong, that it was coincidence, but another part, shaped by the mystery of his grandfather's disappearance, knew better if he didn't do this. No one would. In July 1994, just a week before he vanished, Dominic took Rochelle and the kids on a one-night camping trip to Joaquin Miller Park. He almost never took midweek leave, but this time, he did. Rochelle later recalled how different he seemed. No work talk, no radio, no calls, just him, roasting marshmallows for the kids, telling jokes from his early patrol days, then sitting quietly by the fire, staring off toward the distant hills. That night, after the girls had fallen asleep, he turned to Rochelle and said he had found something that shouldn't exist in this city. She asked what it was, but he just shook his head. "I won't let it hurt anyone else." He said, "Just promise me you'll protect the girls, no matter what." Rochelle didn't realize that would be the last calm conversation they'd ever share. After Dominic vanished, Rochelle went to the department every week, demanding updates, but after 3 months, the case was closed and no clear signs of criminal activity. When she asked about an internal investigation, she got only evasive looks. One officer, someone who'd once worked with Dominic, whispered to her in the parking lot, "Rochelle, don't dig. This city doesn't save honest men." The community Dominic served never forgot him. Every August, a small group gathers at the memorial in Raimondi Park, where his daughters once played. Rochelle brings her children, and later, her grandchildren, people he once helped, now teachers. Nurses still speak his name in prayers, in lessons, in bedtime stories. But what keeps Dominic's memory alive isn't stone or engraved names. It's the unspoken suspicion that he knew something, that there was a network, a shadow, a hidden truth, and that he didn't disappear because of a mistake, but because he refused to stay silent. The night of August 11th, 1994, passed like any other at the end of a long shift. Dominic Johnson had just finished an unusual internal meeting at the Oakland Police Department. Its contents were never documented. Colleagues recalled him leaving looking tired, but resolute, carrying little more than a thin folder and his personal radio. The last surveillance footage captured Dominic exiting the building at 1:47 a.m., streetlights casting a patchy yellow glow across the old jacket he always wore when the nights turned cold. Minutes later, Dominic called his wife from a payphone 3 blocks from the station. "I'm on my way. 15 minutes, he said, his voice steady and brief. That was the last time anyone heard from him. Rochelle waited until nearly 3 a.m. When he didn't come home, she assumed he'd been called back in something that wasn't unusual, but by sunrise, no one at the department knew where he was. 2 days later, a local mechanic stumbled upon an empty police cruiser in a fenced-off quarry in northwest Oakland. The area had long been shut down. Locals called it the dead zone, a place tied to past assaults and drug use. The car was parked at the edge of the quarry, undamaged, doors locked. When police arrived, they found the keys still in the ignition, an odd detail, especially for a veteran officer like Dominic. There was no blood inside, no signs of struggle. The radio battery was dead, and no calls had been made since he left the station. But the most striking item was in the trunk, a black and white computer printout of a map of inner-city Oakland. 6 red circles marked specific locations, 3 abandoned schools, 2 old factories, and a decommissioned church shut down in 1989. No one in the investigative team could explain where the image came from or why it was in Dominic's car. Some assumed it was related to a case he was working. But when Rochelle saw the photo, she remembered Dominic sketching similar maps by hand. He'd once called them transfer points. He never said what they were for. A missing persons file was opened, but after 3 months without leads, the case was reclassified as unsolved disappearance. Rochelle requested department records, only to be told they were lost in a hard drive failure that September. Rumors began circulating. Some said Dominic left on his own. Others hinted he was hiding from something, but no one who truly knew him believed that. When Rochelle learned the cruiser had been found, she arrived at the quarry before the forensics team, standing in the dust of the old rock pit. She stared at the car covered in grime and weathered by time. No one from the department had answers. The scene was handled with no urgency. No proper perimeter was set. A young officer, seeing Rochelle, accidentally blurted out, "Oh, you're related to Dominic. Thought he quit months ago." A chill ran through her. Rochelle looked closer and noticed something no one else had. Dry mud caked under the car didn't match the quarry's soil. It had a reddish tint, distinct to the marshlands on the city's east side. Someone had moved the vehicle here after the fact, a week later. Rochelle returned to the station, asking to see the list of night shift officers on duty the night Dominic vanished. She was told the records were still being updated. Surveillance from the quarry area managed by the city had been non-functional since 1992. Rochelle felt like she was talking to a wall. Everyone was polite, no one was helpful. In one final attempt, she posted a call for witnesses in a local community paper. An elderly woman responded, saying she saw someone matching Dominic's description arguing with another man near an abandoned power station just 3 blocks from the quarry early that morning, but the department dismissed the tip. The witness wasn't sure of the exact date. Months later, the department issued a final report. No evidence of foul play, possible voluntary disappearance, or accident. The case was closed, but Rochelle didn't believe it. Neither did many in the community. Dominic wasn't someone who gave up. He wasn't the kind of man who'd leave behind his family, his colleagues, or the children who called him the kind officer without a word. Something happened, and with that map photo left behind in the trunk, the community has kept Dominic alive in memory and held on to a question that still refuses to fade. What did he discover Imani Carter never imagined she'd become part of an investigation that had nearly faded from memory? When she stepped into that old storage room, the dust was so thick each step seemed to leave a footprint on time itself. The last drawer, holding an old canvas bag, was locked, but the rusted clasp broke loose with barely a tug. Inside, there was nothing of material value, but lying at the bottom was a brown leather notebook, weathered and stained with a Jaya whisper from the past. Imani picked it up. The spine was nearly disintegrated, but the handwriting still bled faintly through under the flickering ceiling light. Back home. Imani began reading. The first pages were case notes names, disappearance dates, last known addresses of missing black teenagers. Mostly boys aged 13 to 17, short, haunting annotations followed each one. Mother says son had no reason to run, no school record access, no neighbor interviews conducted, and at the end of each entry, one word stamped in red ink closed, in several entries. Dominic had sketched relationship maps, names of acquaintances, overlap points between disappearances. One line Imani read over and over, 3 boys, 3 months, 1 route. Can't be coincidence. What haunted her most wasn't just the content, but Dominic's voice through the pages. Not the stiff tone of a police report, but the voice of a man fighting to stay sane inside a web of lies. One page read, "They say I'm paranoid." But the numbers don't lie. Those kids didn't just vanish. Another, "I don't know how much time I have left, but I have to leave something behind." Imani's breath caught as she reached the final page. The handwriting was different, more hurried, perhaps written on the last night Dominic was free, "If I can't speak, let someone else see." The words were shaky, some smeared by rain or tears. No one could say. But to Imani, it wasn't just a message, it was a charge. Someone from the past had placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "It's your turn now." Imani knew she couldn't stay silent, but she couldn't take the notebook to the police. Dominic himself had suspected them. Instead, she turned to someone she trusted, Celeste Bryant, a veteran local journalist who had covered police misconduct in the 1990s. Though now retired and living alone near Lake Merritt, Celeste still had the sharp presence of someone who once stood in front of cameras and demanded truth. When Imani handed her the notebook, Celeste read it in silence for nearly an hour. Finally, she looked up, eyes misted over. "Child, you don't know what you've just stirred." She said, "I remember Dominic. There were rumors, but no proof. Not until now." Celeste recalled that in 1994, just weeks after Dominic vanished, an internal file mysteriously disappeared from the department's central database, an extremely rare occurrence the press was barred from covering. There was something else. She whispered, that same year, 2 high-ranking officers were under internal summons, then suddenly, the case was dropped. No reason, The only person who ever asked about it was Dominic. Together, Imani and Celeste began going through the names Dominic had listed in the notebook. One stood out: Dwayne Hicks, a former patrol partner, and the first to report Dominic missing the morning he failed to show at the rendezvous point. After some searching, they found Hicks retired and living in Antioch, a quiet town about an hour outside Oakland. They arranged to meet at a roadside diner. Hicks was hesitant at first, his eyes wary, like a man long used to carrying secrets. But when Imani handed him a photocopy of the notebook's final page, the line, "If I can't speak, let someone else see," his expression shifted. His hand trembled as he set his coffee down. "I didn't hurt Dominic," he said slowly, "but I knew something wasn't right that night. He got a call off the record, not through dispatch. After that, he left, said he needed to verify one last thing. I never saw him again. When asked why he never reported it, Hicks said only, 'Some calls never get written down.'" After that meeting, Imani returned to the storage room, this time with a camera to document every page of the notebook. She knew emotion wasn't enough. She needed proof. As she examined the back cover, she noticed something thin wedged between the lining and the cardboard, a yellowing slip of paper, almost camouflaged against the aged leather. 4 handwritten lines. "Not an accident. Not just missing. If I vanish, find the one called Captain R. He holds the key." Imani quickly cross-referenced the list of Oakland PD captains from 1993-1994. Only one name matched: Captain Raymond Bell, then head of Internal Affairs, the division responsible for investigating officers. According to public records, Bell retired in late 1995, a year after Dominic's disappearance, and became a private security consultant for a major real estate firm. Celeste began digging through corporate records, and what she found chilled them both. One of the buildings managed by the firm Bell worked for was the same abandoned factory circled on the map found in Dominic's car. Not only that, the map had a red marker around that site, with a note, "High likelihood transfer point 3, check basement." Pieces were falling into place, but raising a bigger question: had Dominic uncovered an organized criminal network, one possibly involving police, real estate, and human trafficking? And if so, who was protecting it? Imani knew she couldn't move forward alone. She sent all documents to a civil rights attorney and contacted an independent investigator who once worked with the Department of Justice, but before either could respond, she received an anonymous message, no number, just the word "unknown" on her phone. "Stop what you're opening buried Dominic." That night, Imani couldn't sleep. She thought about Dominic, about the words in the notebook, about Rochelle's face, remembering her husband, and she knew, no matter the fear, she couldn't turn back now. Dominic had left a key. Now she had to decide if she had the courage to unlock the final door. Saturday morning. Imani stood before the abandoned factory on the far edge of East Oakland, crumbling 3-story structure that once housed a metal processing plant in the 1970s. The building wasn't listed on any current city maps. Its cracked walls, shattered windows, and vines choking every entrance gave it the look of something time had tried to erase. But when Imani held up the map Dominic had left behind, the marker aligned perfectly. The note "Transfer Point 3, check underground" echoed in her mind with every step. She wasn't alone this time. With her was Elijah Moreno, an independent investigator and former inspector for the state's oversight office. Elijah, a Latino man who once lived in Oakland, had reviewed the materials Imani sent. "I remember hearing about Dominic," he said. "I was just an intern back then. They called him the man who wasn't afraid." Imani wasn't sure if that was praise or a warning. They entered through a side door, leading to a basement once used for ventilation systems and storage. They carried flashlights, masks, and a camera. The air was thick with mildew, and each step on the rusted stairs creaked loudly. But something was off. The basement wasn't covered in dust like the rest of the building. Someone had been there recently. In the far corner, behind a patch of wall covered with noticeably newer cement. Elijah tapped gently. It sounded hollow, a false wall, under their flashlight beam. They spotted a rusted iron loop poking out near the edge, once used to lock a trap door. With a careful pull, The wall gave way, revealing a narrow, dark passage, a man-made tunnel, low and quiet. Imani felt the chill rise on her skin. They moved slowly through it. The air inside felt different, like it had recently held breath. The floor was damp concrete, walls lined with rough brick, and every few meters a dim fluorescent bulb flickered, meaning power was still flowing, albeit barely. Elijah glanced at Imani. "Someone's still using this place," he said. At the end of the tunnel, they came upon a steel door, no lock, just a crudely chalked symbol, 3 small circles arranged in a triangle. Imani didn't recognize it. Elijah did. "Internal transfer marker," he whispered. "I've seen it in old files tied to illegal relocation points. Inside." The room was cold-eerily still. Imani could hear her own heartbeat. The only light came from a bare bulb above, swaying faintly as if someone had been there recently. The space was sealed, about 300 square feet. Dark tile covered both the floor and walls. In the center, a scratched metal table, draped with a faded tarp. Elijah stepped forward and pulled back the tarp. Underneath was a thick file, sealed in moisture-proof plastic. The label read, "Internal Transfer Records, 1991-994. Imani leaned closer, recognizing the faint logo of a now-defunct division within the California Department of Social Services, but stamped beneath it, "Confidential, Law Enforcement Only." Inside were over 40 names minors who had been transferred out of Oakland between 1991 and 1994. None of them appeared in foster care, welfare, or any known state tracking system. Most were black teens, some Latino or Asian. Many were marked voluntary departure, but lacked any signature at the very end. One chilling line. "Transfer confirmed destination Oak AR3, supervisor capped ER, Bell." Imani clutched the folder, as if holding something forbidden. "This isn't a social file," Elijah said softly. "It's a disguised human transfer list." And Captain Bell signed off on it. In the corner, they found a locked metal cabinet. Elijah pried it open with a crowbar. Inside were remnants of stolen President's school ID cards, family photos, student journals, and something that made Imani gasp. A faded police badge, etched with the name D. Johnson. Next to the badge was a small handwritten note. He knew. Couldn't let him leave. No signature. That room it had been a vault, not just of records, but of erased lives. Dominic had been there, maybe on his last night, and what he discovered was now in their hands as they stepped out. Elijah turned to her. "Imani, we're not looking anymore. We've found it. Now comes the real choice. Speak out or vanish." Like Dominic, Imani couldn't sleep that night. The faces from the files haunted her, smiling yearbook photos, anxious eyes in shelter intake forms, and one journal entry, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "If I don't come back, Mama, don't look for me. I think they'll keep their promise." She couldn't stop thinking of Dominic. Part of her had held on to the hope that he was alive, maybe forced into silence somewhere, but holding that weathered badge. Imani knew. Dominic was gone, not by accident, not by choice, but because he dared to see what others looked away from. 3 days later, Imani and Elijah visited Cliff Marshall, a former audio technician with the Oakland PD in the early 90s, the last living name in Dominic's notebook. Listed under internal recordings, ask only if certain. Cliff now lived off-grid in an old RV on the Alameda outskirts, relying on disability checks and staying far from anything official. At first, Cliff refused to talk, but when Imani placed a photo of Dominic's badge on the table, he went silent for a long time. "I couldn't keep anything of his." Cliff murmured, "But I remember." He told them that one night in July 1994, Dominic had asked him to back up a recording. No explanation, just, "Hold on to this until no one asks anymore." Cliff didn't keep the recording, but he remembered the words. Dominic had secretly recorded a meeting between senior officers, including Captain Bell, on the tape. Bell's voice said, "We need to clear the way for Route 3. The kids are already arranged. The only problem is Dominic." Another voice replied, "He won't stay quiet." What followed was silence, long, heavy, like a nod you didn't have to say out loud. Cliff never came forward because I knew no one in the system would listen, and I was afraid. Dominic was the last one who still believed there was some conscience left in that department. When he disappeared, I knew I wasn't brave enough. Imani sat in stunned silence. The final pieces were falling into place. Dominic hadn't just known. He had tried to stop it, and because of that, he was chosen to disappear. 3 weeks after the meeting with Cliff, Imani sat in her small apartment, eyes locked on the corkboard pinned to the wall, every piece of the puzzle laid out before her. Dominic's photo, the map, the list of victims, Cliff's statement, notes from the notebook. It all seemed to form a clear picture, a network run by officers, uncovered by Dominic, who was silenced to protect the secret. A tragic chain of events, but at least it made sense. Then came an email. It was from the assistant to a federal prosecutor Elijah had contacted. Attached was a scanned document from the Department of Justice archivist, a copy of an internal investigation report from a 1992 disappearance, the missing person, a 16-year-old named Tyrell James. The officer who filed the initial report, and ultimately concluded no suspicious circumstances. Dominic Johnson. Imani froze. A question hit her that she'd never thought to ask. If Dominic had known about the disappearances, why didn't he speak out sooner? And why had he been the one to close Tyrell's CASA case with glaring similarities to the others? Elijah read the file and spoke quietly. Maybe Dominic was part of the system once, and then he turned around. That idea unraveled everything, not just as a shock, but as a moral disorientation. If Dominic had once turned a blind eye, what had changed him? Was he really the hero people believed he was, or someone trying to undo a mistake he'd once helped create? Imani returned to the storage room where she'd first found the notebook. This time, she didn't just search for information, she searched for a voice. In one entry, between case notes, a line stood out in different ink. Back then, I thought I was doing the right thing. Now I know, right comes too late for the ones already gone. She didn't know what to believe anymore. Dominic, the man she once saw as a beacon of courage, was now a blurred figure between two extremes. A man who was once silent, then woke up. A man who had once been part of the problem and chose to become its greatest challenger. That truth weighed heavier than any clue. On a crisp, early fall afternoon, as leaves fluttered down over the entrance to an old North Oakland apartment complex, Imani knocked on Rochelle Johnson's door again. It wasn't their first meeting, but this time, she came not to ask, but to confess. She told Rochelle everything about the Tyrell James file, the doubts rising in her chest, the fear that she might be building a noble narrative around someone who may have once stayed silent, just like everyone else. Rochelle listened for a long time. Her face didn't change, but her eyes drifted far off, as if rewinding through decades, when Imani finished. Rochelle stood, walked to the bedroom, and returned with an old wooden box. She placed it gently before Imani. Dominic was never perfect. Rochelle said, he used to be afraid. He stayed quiet, tried to hold his seat so he could change it from the inside, his words. But you know, the first time I saw him truly break was March 1993. Inside the box was a smaller cloth-bound journal, dated January to June of that year. Rochelle flipped to a page that had been crossed out many times, nearly torn through. She pointed to a faded line, Tyrell. I trusted my superiors. I trusted the report. I was wrong. Your mother came 3 times. You cried in that photo. I didn't listen. Rochelle explained that after that case, Dominic changed. He requested transfers, began reviewing old files, mapping disappearances, connecting the dots. He couldn't turn back time, she said, but he swore no one else would vanish like that again. Imani's hands trembled as she held the journal. Her questions hadn't disappeared, but one answer had become clear. Dominic hadn't started as a hero, as Ashim. He was someone who failed and chose to face it. The price was his life. Maybe you wanted someone flawless, Rochelle said, but the truth's never that simple. Dominic doesn't need to be idealized. He needs to be understood for the light and the shadows in the same man. Imani left that apartment heavy. but clearer than she'd ever been. Dominic wasn't just a victim. He was a witness, a man who turned back, and someone who paid the price for refusing to look away. And now? Her question wasn't, who was he? But, how far am I willing to go to finish what he started? Imani was nearing her limit. Every new piece of information didn't bring clarity, it pulled her deeper into a maze of half-truths and morally gray people. She began dreaming of Dominic not as a bold hero, but as a man trying to speak, his mouth covered by the hands of his own brothers in uniform. Then, at 2:17 a.m., an anonymous email arrived. Just one line, I was the last person he called before he disappeared. Meet me Public Library, basement level 3. Thursday, 5:30 p.m. No number, no name. Imani went. Basement level 3 of the city library was a forgotten corner dusty, dim, thick with the scent of old books. There, among the stacks of law texts, stood a woman in her 40s or 50s, high-tied curly hair, tidy frame, gray wool coat, Teresa Wells. She said before Imani could speak, used to be an internal data analyst, and I owe Dominic my life. She explained that in 1994, Dominic had asked her for a favor off the record. He wanted someone to cross-check voluntary disappearances in the city against staffing changes across city-funded semi-private institutions. We found something we couldn't explain, she said. A chain of undocumented transfers, no court order, no welfare trail, but all signed off by a police captain. Dominic told her to keep it quiet. But 3 days before he vanished, he called at midnight. If I don't come back, give this to someone who's ready, then silence. The call cut off. She never heard from him again. Teresa hadn't kept the data. She was scared. She printed hard copies, sent them by encrypted mail to an anonymous P.O. Box never knew who received them. The rest she burned. I was a coward, she said, but today I'm here to fix that. She handed Imani a USB drive. Inside, scanned copies of what she had printed before destroying the originals. Over 300 pages, internal transfer orders, disappearance reports, encoded labels that matched Dominic's map. Imani held the drive like it was a live wire. This wasn't theory. This wasn't suspicion. This was proof. There was a system. There were operators. And Dominic's, somehow, against all odds, had broken the silence. Now, it was her turn. December 2023, after nearly a year chasing the truth. Imani stood before the Oakland community, hearing board invited to present evidence related to unresolved historical disappearances. Behind her stood Elijah, Celeste, Teresa, Rochelle, all the people who had once crossed paths with Dominic. Each carried a piece of memory. Imani was the one who connected them. She didn't speak like a prosecutor. She told a story about a man who had once stayed silent, and then chose not to anymore. She made it clear Dominic was not a symbol. He was proof that courage can be complicated, that justice doesn't always come wrapped in verdicts. It sometimes comes in the quiet act of refusing to let truth be forgotten. As she projected images from the notebook, the map, the factory basement files, the room fell silent. An older woman, once a social worker, wept when she saw the name of a child she'd once advocated for transferred without explanation. A young man raised his hand for the first time. I feel like people like us don't just disappear in silence, but despite the emotion, the hearing brought no thunder. No arrests were made, no charges filed. Some records were still unverifiable. Several key figures had already died. Captain Raymond Bell had suffered a fatal stroke 3 months before Imani uncovered the final file. The only thing left was the story. And somehow, that was enough to change the community. A local school renamed its library the D. Johnson Memory Center. After nearly 3 decades, Rochelle was invited to speak at a law enforcement ethics conference. Imani began receiving invitations to speak at universities about community memory, the power of ordinary people to preserve truth through paper, storytelling, and persistence. She was no longer the student cleaning out old storage rooms. She had become a guardian of memory, but at night, alone in her room. Imani still wondered who really killed Dominic. Where did he die? Was anyone there to see it? Those questions no one could answer. They hung in the air like smoke in a dream, close enough to touch, but impossible to hold. And yet, It was that lingering doubt that kept Dominic's story alive, nearly a year after she found that old notebook in the dust. Imani stood before a new bronze plaque outside the public library, Dominic Johnson Community Memory Center, a place to hold the names almost forgotten. Beside her was Rochelle, hair more silver than before, but smiling lighter than she'd looked in years, not because the pain had vanished, but because, finally, the pain had been heard. Imani still had no clear answers about Dominic's death, no recordings, no eyewitness, no official acknowledgement of wrongdoing, but she had fragments, and when pieced together, they formed a silhouette, not flawless, not invincible, but real. This story doesn't end with justice. There is no courtroom, no sentence, but it ends with a reckoning that sometimes truth doesn't need a stamp to be real. It needs memory, repetition, one voice carrying the next. You might see Dominic as a hero, or you might see him as a man who once lost his way and tried to make it right at the end. Maybe you're angry the truth is still incomplete, or maybe you're grateful someone finally chose to listen. Whichever way you feel, remember this: Dominic left behind a question, and now it's in your hands. What do you believe really happened to Dominic Johnson? Was he silenced to protect a hidden system, or did he vanish by choice? After realizing he couldn't win comment, I feel that too if you've ever thought some names get forgotten because they don't fit the official narrative. Comment. We must remember, if you believe communities can hold justice when the law does not, this story isn't closed. It continues in your thoughts, in the voices of others, and in small, quiet acts like opening a door that's been locked for 30 years.